30 years ago, my father-in-law handed me a shovel and told me real gardeners don't need fancy tricks, they just need to work harder. I believed him for about 20 of those 30 years. Then my knees started disagreeing with him, and I had to figure out a different way to keep growing the kind of tomato harvest that makes your neighbors ask what you're doing differently. Turns out, the answer was never working harder. It was picking the right 5 varieties and setting them up so my body barely has to fight the garden at all. I spent about 3 seasons figuring that out the hard way, growing whatever looked interesting on the seed rack, and paying for it every August, with a back that wouldn't let me sleep. These 5 are what survived that trial and error, season after season, regardless of how hot the summer got, or how many afternoons I simply didn't have the energy to babysit a fussy plant. That's what I'm walking you through today. Not every tomato I've ever grown, just the 5 that never let me down, and exactly how I stake, water, and prune them without a single afternoon on my knees. Let's start with the one that started this whole shift for me, Better Boy. This is the variety I go back to every single year, and here's why it earns that spot. It's a hybrid, which means it was bred specifically for reliability, strong resistance to verticillium wilt, fusarium wilt, and nematodes, the 3 things that quietly kill more tomato plants than any bug ever will. What that means for you is fewer dead plants in July and more actual tomatoes on your table. I grow mine on a single 10-foot conduit stake, planted right at the edge of my waist-high raised bed, so I never have to bend to tie it up. I just reach straight out from where I'm standing. I prune it down to 2 main leaders and nothing else, snipping the little sucker shoots that form at each leaf joint before they ever get the chance to turn into a tangle I'd have to fight later. Picture this. Next August, you're standing at that same bed with your morning coffee, reaching straight ahead instead of down, and there's a 5-ounce tomato right at eye level, ready to twist off. The second variety earns its spot for a completely different reason. It barely needs staking at all. Celebrity is a semi-determinate hybrid, which in plain terms means it grows into a tidy, compact bush instead of a 10-foot vine that needs constant taming. I keep one simple cage around mine, set once in spring, and I'm done. No weekly tying, no chasing new growth up a pole. What the seed catalogs don't tell you clearly enough is that semi-determinate is really code for built for gardeners who don't want to spend their whole summer wrestling a trellis. It sets a heavy first flush of fruit all at once, which means 1 or 2 good harvest days, instead of picking a tomato here and there for weeks. If your hands or your balance make climbing a stepladder to tie up a tall vine something you'd rather skip entirely, this is the variety that solves that problem for you before it starts. There's one more thing worth knowing about Better Boy before I move on, because it trips up a lot of gardeners our age, and it did the same to me for years. Tomatoes are prone to something called sun scald. It's essentially a sunburn on the fruit itself, and it happens when you strip away too many of the lower leaves at once, thinking you're tidying the plant up. I used to do exactly that every July, clearing every leaf below the first fruit cluster because it looked neater, and I'd end up with pale, leathery patches on the shoulders of my best tomatoes that would rot before I ever got to pick them. What I do now is simple. I only remove leaves that are already yellowing or touching the soil, and I leave everything else in place until the fruit is fully ripe and ready to harvest. If your bed faces south or west and gets strong afternoon sun, leave even more leaf cover than you think you need. It costs you nothing, and it saves fruit you'd otherwise lose to rot 2 days before you were going to pick it anyway. Now, I know exactly what some of you are thinking, because I hear a version of it every week in the comments. Walt, I can't afford 10-foot conduit stakes and cattle panels. I'm gardening on a fixed income. I hear you, and here's the part the fancy trellis videos never mention. My very first tomato stake wasn't a stake at all. It was a broken broom handle I found in the garage, pounded into the ground with a rubber mallet, tied off with strips cut from an old bed sheet. That plant produced just as many tomatoes as anything I've grown since on a proper conduit pole. If money's tight this year, look around your garage or your basement before you look at a store shelf, an old curtain rod, a fence post somebody threw out. Even a sturdy tree branch will hold a celebrity or aroma just fine. The tomato doesn't know the difference, only your wallet does. But even the right stake and the right variety won't save you if you're still hauling water across the yard by hand every single evening. And that's the mistake that quietly wears people our age down faster than any of the digging ever does. More on how I fixed that in just a minute. Quick one before I keep going. Team cattle panel arch, or team single stake. Tell me which one you run in your own garden. I read every comment. Here's the watering piece, because it matters more than people think. I run a simple soaker line to every bed, on a $12 mechanical timer screwed straight onto the spigot. No app, no electricity, nothing to charge. I water deep and slow, about an hour, once every 3 days through the hottest stretch of summer, rather than a quick splash every evening. The reason that matters isn't just convenience, although not hauling a heavy can across the yard twice a day is reason enough at our age. Watering deep and infrequently trains the roots to grow down into the cool, moist soil, instead of staying shallow and thirsty near the hot surface. That's the difference between a plant that wilts the second a heat wave hits 95 degrees and one that keeps setting fruit right through it. Set the timer once on a Sunday morning, and you're done thinking about it until the next Sunday. Before I get to the rest of the varieties, I want to show you the second staking method I use, because a single stake isn't always the right answer. If you've got the space and you want more than 5 or 6 plants, a cattle panel arch is the best no-bend setup I've found in 30 years of gardening. It's one 16-foot livestock panel, the same sturdy welded wire fencing you'd find at any farm supply store, bent into an arch and anchored at both ends with rebar stakes pounded a foot into the ground. Once it's up, it stays up for years. I've had mine in place for close to a decade now. The reason it matters for us specifically is the openings in the wire sit at a height where you never crouch or reach overhead. You plant along the base, train the vines up and through the openings as they grow, and by midsummer you're harvesting standing fully upright, reaching straight out at chest height in every direction, on both sides of the arch at once. It takes an afternoon to build, maybe 2 if you're going slow and taking breaks, which I'd recommend at our age regardless of what you're building. Once it's standing, you'll get years out of it before you touch it again. The third variety on my list is Early Girl, and if I could only keep one tomato in my whole garden, there's a real chance it'd be this one. It's usually the first ripe tomato I pick every single year, often as early as the 4th of July, and it's frequently still setting fruit when everything else has given up for the season. What makes it worth the spot on this list isn't just the early start, it's how forgiving it is. Early Girl tolerates a missed watering day, a late feeding, an afternoon I simply didn't have the energy to get out there, better than almost anything else I grow. I stake mine the same way as the Better Boy, one center pole, pruned to 2 liters, tied up loosely every 12 inches or so with old strips of pantyhose instead of store-bought tape, which costs nothing and won't cut into the stem as the plant thickens. Fourth is Roma, and this one solves a problem nobody else in this niche seems to talk about. What happens when your body simply can't manage a 10-foot vine anymore, in any form? Roma is a determinate pace tomato, which means it grows to a fixed compact size, usually no taller than 3 or 4 feet, sets its whole crop over a shorter window, and then it's done for the season. I grow mine in a large half-barrel container, at exactly the same height as my raised beds, no staking at all beyond one short cage for support in wind. If you're finding that even a semi-determinate variety like Celebrity feels like more plant than you want to manage this year, Roma is the answer. Smaller, self-supporting, and every bit as productive for sauce, canning, or just slicing fresh off the vine. And if you're gardening on a patio or a balcony with no ground bed at all, Roma is still your answer, just in a bigger pot. I've grown it in everything from a genuine half-barrel down to a 15-gallon nursery container. And it never seemed to mind the difference as long as the container was deep enough. You want at least 12 inches of soil depth for the roots to settle into. Set the container on a wheeled plant caddy if lifting or dragging it later in the season is a concern, and you can move the whole thing to catch more sun, or pull it somewhere sheltered if a hailstorm rolls through, without ever bending down to do it. Quick one. If you've made it this far with me, drop the word Roma below. It genuinely helps this video find more folks like us. The fifth and last variety is Sun Gold, and I'll be honest, this one's not about ease, it's about joy. It's a cherry tomato, an F1 hybrid, and it is without question the sweetest thing that comes out of my garden every summer, closer to candy than to anything you'd put on a sandwich. It's vigorous, so it does need real support. The same single stake method as the Better Boy works fine, and it will produce right up until the first frost if you keep picking it. I grow one single Sun Gold plant every year, no more, because one plant produces more cherry tomatoes than 2 people can eat fresh. I've given away grocery bags of them to neighbors by August, and still had more coming. There's something about walking out with a coffee, popping one straight off the vine, still warm from the sun, that reminds you why you started doing this in the first place, long before it was about staying independent or proving anything to anybody. Just a tomato, and a reason to be outside for another 5 minutes. One more thing that matters more than people realize, especially in raised beds where the same small footprint of soil gets used year after year. Crop rotation. Tomatoes are related to peppers, eggplant, and potatoes, and all of them are susceptible to soil-borne diseases that build up over time if you plant the same family in the same spot every single year. In a full-size garden, you'd rotate tomatoes through a different bed every 2 to 3 years. In raised beds, where space is tighter, I do something simpler that still works. Every fall, after the last harvest, I pull the spent plants completely, roots and all, and top-dress that bed with 2 inches of fresh compost before I plant anything else in it for winter or spring. It's not a full rotation, but it resets the soil enough that I haven't had a serious disease problem in the same bed 2 years running. If you've only got 1 or 2 raised beds and rotating isn't realistic for you, lean harder on the disease-resistant hybrids like Better Boy and Celebrity in that spot, and save the heirlooms, which tend to be more disease-prone, for whichever bed had something else growing in it last year. All 5 of these share one thing underneath the surface, and it's the real secret if there is one: healthy soil that's doing most of the work for you. Every one of my raised beds gets a blend of topsoil, compost, and worm castings when I first fill it, roughly equal parts of each, and then I feed everything with a simple organic tomato fertilizer every 6 to 8 weeks through the season. When I first transplant each seedling, I mix a small handful of that same fertilizer directly into the planting hole, along with a spoonful of crushed eggshell for the calcium, which helps prevent blossom end rot, that ugly black sunken spot that shows up on the bottom of an otherwise perfect tomato. That's it. No secret formula, no expensive additive, no soil test kit you need a chemistry degree to read. The soil life, the earthworms, the fungi, the bacteria you can't see, does the heavy lifting long before I ever pick up a watering can. My job is mostly just staying out of its way. One question I get constantly, and I want to answer it directly, instead of dancing around it. Will these 5 actually work wherever you are? All 5 are grown from coast to coast, from short-season northern gardens to the 100-degree stretches I deal with here. But your timing shifts depending on your zone. If you're in a shorter growing season, up in zone 5 or 6, get Early Girl in the ground first, since it's bred to produce fast, and treat Sun Gold as your reward crop rather than your main one, since it takes longer to really hit its stride. If you're in zone 8 or warmer like I am, all 5 will produce right through summer as long as that watering schedule stays consistent, and you can often get a second round of Roma in by late summer for a fall harvest. None of these 5 need anything exotic about your soil or your climate. They need water on a schedule, a little bit of that early feeding, and to not be fighting a trellis that's too tall or too fussy for what you actually want to manage this year. I put the exact stake heights, the pruning schedule for each of these 5 varieties, and the fertilizer I've used for 15 years into a free checklist. Links right below if you want the shortcut instead of learning it plant by plant like I did. Here's what I want you to take from all this. None of these 5 varieties are exotic. You won't need to hunt down a specialty seed catalog or drive 2 hours to a rare plant sale. Better Boy, Celebrity, Early Girl, Roma, and Sun Gold are sitting on the seed rack at your local hardware store right now, today, this week, for a few dollars a packet. The difference was never the variety you can't find. It's setting every single one of them up so your body isn't fighting the garden all summer long. Wide reach at waist height instead of bending to the ground. A single stake, a compact bush, or an arch you built once and never touch again, instead of a trellis project every spring. Water that runs itself on a timer instead of a can you carry twice a day. None of that costs more than the version that wears you out. It just takes a little thought up front, the kind I didn't have 30 years ago when my father-in-law handed me that shovel. If you want the checklist with every detail from this video, it's free, link right below. Next week, I'm showing you the one soil mistake in container beds that quietly kills more plants than any pest ever does. That one caught me off guard the first time it happened, and I don't want it catching you off guard too. This is real gardening, for real bodies, from someone who's still out there every single morning with his coffee, and isn't planning on stopping.